The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the small adobe homestead as Sarah McKenna hung wet laundry on the line behind her house. 6 months had passed since Thomas's death, and the familiar routine of daily chores had become her anchor against the crushing weight of grief and loneliness. The September heat shimmered off the red rocks in the distance, creating ghostly mirages that danced across the desert floor. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, and gazed toward the small wooden cross that marked Thomas's grave beneath the lone cottonwood tree. "Another day, my love," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the desert wind. The sound of approaching hoofbeats shattered the afternoon silence. Sarah's heart quickened as she counted at least 6 riders emerging from the heat haze, their faces obscured by bandanas and wide-brimmed hats. She recognized the type immediately: drifters, outlaws, the kind of men who preyed on isolated homesteads like vultures on carrion. "Afternoon, ma'am," called the lead rider, a burly man with cold grey eyes and a jagged scar running from his left ear to his jaw. "Name's Jack Morrison, but folks call me Black Jack. We're looking for water and supplies." Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped the wet sheet tighter. I don't have much to spare, gentlemen. Perhaps you could try the settlement at Copper Creek, about 20 miles east." Black Jack dismounted slowly, his spurs jingling with each step. "Now, that's mighty inhospitable of you, widow woman. See, we've been riding hard, and we're not in the mood for a 20-mile detour." His eyes scanned the modest homestead with predatory interest. "Besides, word is your late husband might have left you more than just this patch of dirt." "I don't know what you mean." Sarah's voice cracked despite her attempt to sound firm. "Don't play dumb with me, lady." Black Jack stepped closer, his hand resting on his gun belt. "Tom McKenna was known to do business with the silver mines up north. Folks say he had himself a nice little stash hidden away before the Apache got him." Sarah's blood ran cold. Thomas had indeed hidden a small fortune in gold coins beneath the floorboards of their bedroom, money he'd earned from his work as a mining assayer. She'd planned to use it to start fresh somewhere back east, away from the memories and the constant threat of Apache raids. "There's no money here," she lied, backing toward the house. "Thomas left me nothing but debts and this homestead." Black Jack's cruel laugh echoed off the canyon walls. "Boys, seems like the widow needs some convincing. Search the house." The other 5 men dismounted and stormed toward the adobe building. Sarah heard the crash of furniture being overturned, the splintering of wood, and the shattering of her few precious belongings. Within minutes, one of the outlaws emerged triumphant, holding a canvas bag that clinked with the weight of gold coins. "Found it, boss. Hidden under the bedroom floor, just like you said." Black Jack's scarred face twisted into a malevolent grin. "Much obliged, ma'am. But here's the thing. We can't have you running to the cavalry and telling tales about where you lost your nest egg." Before Sarah could react, rough hands seized her arms. A dirty cloth was forced over her mouth, and her wrists were bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. The outlaws hoisted her onto a horse, and within moments the group was thundering across the desert toward the jagged peaks of Devil's Canyon. The ride seemed to last forever. Sarah's body ached from the constant jolting, and the desert sun baked her skin through her torn dress. As they climbed higher into the rocky terrain, the air grew thinner, and the path more treacherous. Devil's Canyon loomed ahead, a massive gorge carved by centuries of flash floods, its walls dropping hundreds of feet into darkness. Black Jack reined in his horse at the canyon's edge and dismounted. "This is where your story ends, widow woman. Can't say it's been a pleasure." Sarah's heart pounded as she stared into the abyss below. The wind whipped through the canyon, carrying with it the distant cry of a hawk and the whisper of ancient secrets buried in the desert stone. She closed her eyes and thought of Thomas, praying that death would reunite them quickly. Then, cutting through the desert silence like a blade, came the sound of a single war cry, primal, haunting, and filled with deadly purpose. The war cry echoed off the canyon walls like thunder, and every man present felt ice run through his veins, despite the desert heat. Black Jack Morrison spun toward the sound, his hand flying to his Colt .45, while his men scrambled for their weapons with the panic of cornered rats. From the ridge above came the Apache warrior, his paint horse moving with fluid grace down the treacherous slope. Naalnish sat tall in his saddle, his bronze chest bare except for a leather breastplate adorned with turquoise stones. His long black hair was bound with red cloth, and war paint in stark white and black stripes marked his face. But it was what he carried that made even hardened outlaws pause in terror. A massive quiver strapped to his back, bristling with exactly 200 arrows, each one fletched with eagle feathers, and tipped with razor-sharp obsidian. "Apache," one of Morrison's men shouted, raising his rifle with shaking hands. Naalnish's dark eyes swept the scene below. The bound white woman at the canyon's edge, the stolen gold glinting in the afternoon sun, and the 6 men who had haunted his dreams for months. His jaw tightened as he recognized Black Jack Morrison's scarred face, the same face he'd seen illuminated by flames as his village burned, as his wife and children screamed their last breaths. "You!" Naalnish spoke in heavily accented English, his voice carrying the weight of granite. "You are the one who killed my family." Morrison's eyes narrowed as recognition dawned. "Well, I'll be damned. It's the savage from the Chiricahua camp we hit last spring. Boys, looks like we got ourselves a 2-for-1 special today." The Apache warrior's hand moved to his bow with practiced precision. In one fluid motion, he knocked an arrow and drew the string back to his ear. The obsidian point gleamed wickedly in the sunlight. "Charlie, get behind that rock!" Morrison barked to his nearest man. "Jenkins, circle around to the left. The rest of you spread out and keep firing. One redskin can't take all of us." The first gunshot shattered the desert silence. Naalnish's horse reared, but the warrior remained perfectly balanced, releasing his arrow with deadly accuracy. The projectile found its mark in Charlie's chest, dropping him instantly. Before the echo of the gunshot had faded, Naalnish had already nocked and fired a second arrow, this one catching Jenkins in the shoulder and spinning him around like a child's toy. Sarah watched in terrified fascination as the Apache warrior moved with supernatural grace, his bow singing its deadly song. Arrow after arrow flew from his quiver, each one finding its target with lethal precision. The outlaw's wild gunfire echoed uselessly off the canyon walls, while Naalnish seemed to dance between the bullets, his movements fluid as water, deadly as lightning. "Damn you!" Morrison screamed, emptying his revolver in the warrior's direction. "Stand still and die like a man!" But Naalnish was already moving, his paint horse carrying him in a wide arc around the canyon rim. 2 more of Morrison's men fell, one with an arrow through his throat, the other pierced clean through the heart. The remaining outlaw threw down his weapon and ran, disappearing into the maze of red rocks with terror-driven speed. Morrison found himself alone, his gun empty, facing an Apache warrior whose quiver still bristled with nearly 200 arrows. Sweat poured down his scarred face as he fumbled to reload, his hands shaking with the knowledge that death was stalking him with patient, inexorable purpose. "Please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I got money. Gold. You can have it all." Naalnish's painted face showed no emotion as he dismounted and walked toward the outlaw leader. His bow remained ready, another arrow nocked, but not yet drawn. "You burned my village. You killed my wife, Desba. You killed my children, Ashki and Atsa. You took everything from me." "It wasn't personal," Morrison babbled, backing toward the canyon edge. "It was just business. The army paid us to clear out Apache camps. We were just following orders." "Orders?" Naalnish's voice dripped with contempt. "You hide behind white man's words, but I know what you are. You are a killer who feeds on the innocent." Morrison's boots slipped on loose gravel, and he stumbled backward. For a moment, he teetered on the very edge of Devil's Canyon, his arms windmilling frantically for balance. Terror filled his eyes as he stared into the abyss below. Sarah, still bound and forgotten in the chaos, watched as justice balanced on a knife's edge. The Apache warrior stood motionless, his arrow aimed at Morrison's heart, vengeance within easy reach. The desert wind whistled through the canyon, carrying with it the weight of all the pain and loss that had brought them to this moment. Time seemed suspended between heartbeats, between breaths between the living and the dead. The moment stretched like a taut bowstring, Morrison swaying on the canyon's edge while Naalnish held his arrow steady. The outlaw leader's face had gone pale beneath his whiskers, his eyes wide with the proximity of death. Sarah could hear his labored breathing even from where she sat bound, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Do it," Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Get it over with." But something in Naalnish's expression shifted. The warrior's dark eyes moved from Morrison to Sarah, taking in her torn dress, her bound hands, the bruises on her face. For the first time, he seemed to truly see her, not as part of his enemy's world, but as another victim of the same violence that had destroyed his family. "No," Naalnish said quietly, lowering his bow. "Death is too easy for you. You will live with what you have done, as I must live with what I have lost." Morrison's relief was palpable, but it lasted only a moment. Naalnish's arrow flew true, piercing the outlaw's gun hand and pinning it to the wooden stock of his rifle. Morrison screamed, stumbling forward away from the canyon edge, his weapon useless. "Run," Naalnish commanded, his voice carrying the authority of thunder. "Run and tell others what happened here. Tell them that Naalnish of the Chiricahua remembers." Morrison needed no further encouragement. Clutching his wounded hand, he scrambled toward his horse and galloped away into the desert, leaving a trail of blood drops on the red sand. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. Sarah found herself alone with the Apache warrior, who had just saved her life. Though she wasn't certain her situation had improved, stories of Apache cruelty were legend among the white settlers, tales of torture and scalping that mothers used to frighten disobedient children. Naalnish approached her slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Up close she could see the intricate beadwork on his leather vest, the careful way his war paint had been applied, the intelligence in his dark eyes. He knelt beside her and drew a bone-handled knife from his belt. Sarah flinched, expecting the worst, but instead felt the ropes around her wrists fall away. She rubbed her chafed skin, staring at the man who had shown her mercy when she expected none. "Why?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the cloth gag. "Why did you help me?" Naalnish studied her face for a long moment before answering. "Because I know what it means to lose everything to evil men. Because you are not my enemy, even though your people and mine are at war." Sarah struggled to her feet, her legs unsteady after hours of being bound. I don't understand. My husband was killed by Apache warriors. I was told your people showed no mercy to whites." "Your husband?" Naalnish's expression darkened. "Where did he die?" "At our homestead 6 months ago. He was working in the fields when they came. I hid in the root cellar and watched them." She couldn't finish the sentence, the memories too painful. Naalnish was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I know of this attack. It was not my band. It was young warriors from the Mescalero. Angry and without wisdom, they acted without the counsel of their elders, and many innocent people died on both sides because of their rage." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All these months she had painted every Apache with the same brush of hatred, never considering that they might be as divided and complex as her own people. "I'm Sarah," she said quietly. "Sarah McKenna." "Naalnish," he replied, then added, "In your language it means, he who works." The late afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the canyon floor. Sarah looked around at the bodies of Morrison's men, then at the bag of gold coins scattered across the red earth. "What happens now?" Naalnish followed her gaze. "Now we must leave this place. The gunshots will bring others, cavalry, maybe more outlaws. This canyon will be filled with men seeking answers, and neither of us can give them the truth without dying." "I can't go back home," Sarah realized with growing despair. "Morrison will send more men, or he'll tell the army I was helping Apache warriors. Either way, I'm a dead woman." "Then come with me," Naalnish said simply. "I know places in the desert where no white man has ever walked. Hidden springs, caves where we can shelter. You will be safe until we can find another way." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "You're asking me to trust you? An Apache warrior?" "I am asking you to choose between certain death and uncertain life," Naalnish replied. "The choice is yours, Sarah McKenna." The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of distant rain and the promise of a storm approaching from the mountains. Sarah looked once more at the scattered gold, her husband's legacy, her ticket to a new life. Then, at the Apache warrior who had risked everything to save a stranger. "How do I know you won't kill me once we're away from here?" she asked. Naalnish picked up one of his fallen arrows and examined its obsidian point. "Because if I wanted you dead, you would already be walking with your ancestors." The simple truth of his words settled over her like a blanket. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding that her old life had ended the moment Black Jack Morrison's men had ridden onto her homestead. Whatever came next, it would be something entirely different from anything she had ever known. "All right," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'll come with you." The desert twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold as Naalnish led Sarah away from Devil's Canyon. His paint horse carried them both, Sarah seated behind the Apache warrior, with her arms reluctantly circling his waist for balance. The unfamiliarity of the situation, riding with a man she'd been taught to fear, fleeing into a wilderness that could kill them both, made her stomach tight with anxiety. Naalnish guided them through a maze of red sandstone formations, following paths that seemed invisible to Sarah's untrained eyes. The horse's hooves found purchase on narrow ledges and hidden trails that wound deeper into the heart of the desert mountains. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped dramatically, and Sarah found herself shivering in her thin cotton dress. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To a place my grandfather showed me when I was a boy," Naalnish replied without turning around. "A sacred place where the spirits of water still live, even in the driest season." They rode in silence for another hour, the only sounds the soft footfalls of the horse and the distant call of a coyote. Sarah's body ached from the long day, and exhaustion threatened to overcome her fear. Just when she thought she couldn't hold on any longer, Naalnish reined in his horse. "We walk from here," he said, dismounting and helping her down. "The horse cannot follow where we must go." Sarah looked around in bewilderment. They stood at the base of a sheer cliff face that seemed to stretch up into the star-filled sky. There was no visible path, no indication of shelter anywhere. Naalnish seemed to sense her confusion. "Trust," he said simply, then began removing items from his horse's pack. He handed Sarah a rough woolen blanket and a leather water pouch. "Follow me. Step only where I step." He led her to what appeared to be a solid rock wall, but as they approached, Sarah realized there was a narrow crack in the stone, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. Naalnish lit a small torch, made from bundled sage and pine pitch, then gestured for her to follow him into the crevice. The passage was claustrophobic at first, the rough stone walls pressing against her shoulders. But after about 20 feet, it opened into a hidden chamber that took Sarah's breath away. The torchlight revealed a natural cathedral carved by centuries of wind and water, with smooth walls that curved up into darkness. At the far end, she could hear the gentle sound of flowing water. "This is To Biuhali," Naalnish said, his voice echoing softly off the stone walls. "In your language it means, 'where water flows in secret,' and my people have used this place for generations when the desert became too dangerous." Sarah followed him deeper into the cave, marveling at the ancient petroglyphs that decorated the walls, images of hunters, animals, and symbols she couldn't understand. The spring emerged from a crack in the rock, forming a clear pool before disappearing again into the earth. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside the water to drink. The liquid was cool and sweet, the first truly clean water she'd tasted in days. Naalnish began gathering dried wood from a pile near the cave entrance. "My grandfather brought me here when I was 8 winters old. He said this place would shelter our people when the world above became too full of hatred and war." As he built a small fire, Sarah wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and studied her unlikely protector. The dancing flames highlighted the strong lines of his face, the careful way he moved, the quiet dignity that seemed to emanate from him like warmth. "You speak English very well," she observed. "I learned from a missionary when I was young," Naalnish replied, feeding small twigs to the growing fire. "Father Martinez. He was killed by soldiers 3 years ago for teaching Apache children to read." The simple statement carried a weight of grief that Sarah recognized. "I'm sorry. It sounds like he was a good man." "He was. Like your husband, I think. A man who tried to build instead of destroy." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Thomas was a good man. He never wanted to fight anyone. He just wanted to build a life for us in this territory. And now he is gone and you are here with his killer's enemy," Naalnish said softly. "The world is full of such ironies." "You're not my enemy," Sarah said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "You saved my life. You showed mercy when you could have taken revenge." Naalnish poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing up toward the cave ceiling. "Revenge is a poison that kills the one who drinks it. My grandfather taught me this. He said that hatred makes a man forget who he truly is." "Then why do you carry so many arrows?" Sarah asked, gesturing toward the massive quiver that he'd set aside near the cave wall. "Because sometimes the world forces us to fight, even when we would choose peace." Naalnish's dark eyes met hers across the fire. "Each arrow represents a life I may have to take to protect those I love. But I pray to the spirits that I will never need to use them all." Outside the cave, the wind began to howl, and Sarah could hear the distant rumble of thunder. The storm that had been building all day was finally arriving, and she shivered at the thought of being caught in the open desert. "Will they find us here?" she asked. "Not in this storm," Naalnish assured her. "The rain will wash away our tracks, and few white men know these hidden places. We will be safe until morning." As if summoned by his words, the first drops of rain began to fall, creating a curtain of water across the cave entrance. Sarah pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and moved closer to the fire. Despite everything that had happened, despite the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring, she felt safer than she had in months. Naalnish, she said quietly. Thank you for everything. The Apache warrior nodded, then began to sing softly in his native language, a haunting melody that seemed to blend with the sound of the rain and the crackling fire. Sarah didn't understand the words, but she felt their meaning, a song of sorrow and hope, of loss and survival, of two souls finding unexpected shelter in a world torn apart by war. Sarah woke to the sound of birdsong and the gentle patter of rain still falling outside the cave. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, and morning light filtered through the water curtain at the cave entrance. Naalnish was already awake, sitting cross-legged near the spring, his bow across his knees as he carefully inspected each arrow in his quiver. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, stretching her stiff muscles. "The sun has been up for 2 hours," he replied, without looking up from his work. "The storm will pass soon, but we must decide what comes next." Sarah sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. In the clear light of morning, the reality of her situation felt both more terrifying and more hopeful than it had the night before. "I can't go back to my old life. Morrison will make sure of that." "No, you cannot," Naalnish agreed, "but that does not mean you have no future." He set down his bow and moved to the cave entrance, peering out at the rain-washed desert. "There is a trading post 3 days' ride south of here. The man who runs it, Samuel Cortez, is Mexican. He has no love for outlaws or cavalry, and he asks few questions of those who bring him honest trade. You think he would help me? He helped me once when soldiers were hunting my band. He is a man who judges others by their actions, not the color of their skin." Naalnish turned back to her. "You could start a new life there. Use your skills. You can read and write, yes? Cortez needs someone to keep his books, handle correspondence with suppliers back east." Sarah considered this. It wasn't the life she'd planned with Thomas, but it was a life, a chance to rebuild rather than simply survive. "What about you? What will you do?" Naalnish's expression grew thoughtful. "My war band is scattered. Some have gone to the reservation, others have fled to Mexico. I am alone like you." He paused, then added quietly, "Perhaps it is time for both of us to find a new path." The rain began to lighten, and shafts of sunlight pierced the clouds outside. Sarah stood and walked to the spring, splashing the cool water on her face. When she looked up, she found Naalnish watching her, with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I have a proposition," she said suddenly, the words coming out before she could stop them. "Come with me to the trading post, not as my protector, but as my partner. You know the desert, the people, the dangers. I know numbers, letters, business. Together, we could build something." Naalnish's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You would trust me with such a thing? A white woman in business with an Apache warrior?" "The world is changing," Sarah said, gaining confidence as she spoke. "The old ways of thinking, your people against mine, they've brought nothing but death and sorrow. Maybe it's time to try something different." "It would not be easy," Naalnish warned. "There will be those on both sides who see us as traitors. We would face hatred, violence, maybe worse." "Then we'll face it together," Sarah replied. "As equals, as partners, as two people who choose to build rather than destroy." Outside, the storm was finally breaking. Golden sunlight began to stream through the cave entrance, and the sound of rain gave way to the gentle drip of water from the rocks above. Naalnish stood and walked to his quiver, running his fingers over the arrows he'd spent the morning inspecting. 200 arrows, he said softly. "My grandfather made this quiver for me when I became a warrior. He said it held enough death to last a lifetime." He looked at Sarah with eyes that held both pain and hope. "Perhaps it is time to find a different way to fill my days." Sarah felt her heart lift with something she hadn't experienced in months, genuine hope for the future. "So you'll come with me?" "I will come with you," Naalnish confirmed, "but not as an Apache warrior traveling with a white woman. We will need new names, new stories. The desert is full of people running from their past. No one will question two more." They spent the morning preparing for their journey, gathering supplies and planning their route to Cortez's trading post. As they worked, Sarah found herself studying her companion with new eyes. He was still the same man who had saved her life, but now she saw him as something more, a potential future, a chance at redemption for both of them. "Sarah," Naalnish said as they prepared to leave the cave, "there is something I must tell you. The attack on your homestead, I knew the warriors who did it. They were young, angry, seeking revenge for their own losses. When I heard what they had done, I tried to stop them, but it was too late." Sarah felt a chill run through her. "You knew who killed Thomas?" "I did not know it was your husband specifically, but yes, I knew of the attack. I have carried that guilt with me for months. Naalnish met her eyes steadily. If you cannot forgive this, I will understand. I will take you to safety and then disappear from your life. Sarah stared at him for a long moment, processing this revelation. The man who had saved her life had also known the men who had destroyed it. The irony was almost too much to bear, yet somehow it also felt like a form of justice, a way for the circle of violence to be broken. I forgive you, she said finally. Thomas would want me to choose healing over hatred, and maybe this is how it was meant to be. Two people from different worlds, finding a way to honor the dead by building something new for the living. Naalnish nodded solemnly. Then we go forward together, not as Apache and White, but as partners in a new kind of life. As they emerged from the cave into the bright desert morning, Sarah felt the weight of her old life falling away like a discarded skin. The woman who had hung laundry behind an adobe homestead was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more hopeful. Together they mounted Naalnish's paint horse and rode south toward the trading post, toward Samuel Cortez, and toward a future that neither of them could have imagined just days before. Behind them, the hidden spring continued to flow in its secret chamber, a reminder that even in the harshest desert, life finds a way to endure and flourish. The sun climbed higher in the clear blue sky, and Sarah found herself smiling for the first time in months. The world was still dangerous, still full of hatred and violence, but it was also full of possibility, and sometimes that was enough to make the journey worthwhile.